Hey, how's everybody doing? This is Marvin. Sorry for the 2.5 month. It seemed like 2.5 month delay. Um, in getting these videos out. Just a lot been going on as far as this whole process. Just life in general, work. And I'm coaching t-ball now, so I think that also haven't really had much energy as of late to do this thing. And I'm trying to also work out and get back in shape and shredding for the wedding. Hashtag shredding for the wedding. Um, getting ready for the wedding and getting ready for everything. But did want to try to get these back more on pace, more on topic, and I'm gonna try to my best to do two different videos tonight. First one, a little bit about what I call fear, and kind of apply it to a sports kind of analogy, and then my second video this evening will be more about just wedding planning 101 and kind of talking through that whole process of two families coming together as one and how that whole works out and just having the opportunity over the last month and a half actually to go to two different weddings, um, two distinctly different weddings were still two very beautiful weddings, and kind of that whole process and just even down to invitations and everything of that, so I do think um, that will be a good second topic to talk about, but wanted to talk about really what I call is the contrast and views into going into marriage. I've been really blessed over the last few weeks and months, and even before that, really getting a lot of great advice, and not necessarily advice from people that are in perfect marriages or anything of that nature, but just general life advice. And part of what I wanted to do in this video was really just to communicate that to everybody about the things that I'm hearing, the things that people have brought to my attention, and really kind of put it all on a platform of, let's talk about it. These are things that people go through. These are things that people experience, and um, it's really interesting to see how, in most scenarios, how the man and the wife or the bride and the groom, how they approach marriage. And I think it's really more of a gender role and gender approach of how ultimately guys, and going back to the whole concept of real guys, how they approach marriage, and also ultimately how females approach marriage. Because I think that's where I think that fear factor comes in to a marriage, and to guys, and they have that fear factor of, now I'm getting married, what's next. And I thought of, my whole life has been really rolled around sports. Sports has given me the avenue to meet my wife, and also meet, a lot of my great friends. I don't know, academically, I didn't, I didn't, I don't say I didn't work hard in high school, but ultimately I didn't perform up to my potential in high school. But luckily, my athletic ability afforded me an opportunity to get into a great institution such as James Madison University. So, um, but I wanted to approach it from a sports dynamic of how women kind of approach the wedding as their draft day. As the draft is coming up actually next week, I thought it would kind of be another important touch is that I think a lot of times women approach it, the draft, approach their wedding as a draft day. This is the ultimately the beginning of their career. This is where they kick off. This is where they start. Um, and I think that's what, typically a lot of females come into marriage, and, they become this new person. They become a new individual because ultimately they've never been in this position before. They never experienced this before, but this is ultimately what they always wanted. And I'm not saying it's for every woman. I actually had a conversation with one of the maid of honors of my fiancés, and she had a contrasting view, a different view of it all. But I think ultimately, this is kind of the kickoff for them. It is ultimately this is the draft day, and this is the crowning moment of their career. This is what they, going back to my last episode, what they kind of put in the work over the last few years of their life to accomplish, whether it was working on their career, working on different things. They were building up to that draft day to get drafted. And now that's their wedding day and they've been drafted. And I think for guys, it's almost the opposite. I think guys kind of almost approach their wedding day as their retirement party. Especially when you're talking about bachelor parties, they always say it's the last hurrah. And I think that sometimes dooms not necessarily marriage, but it gives the guy a different concept of thinking that ultimately once their marriage occurs, their life is pretty much over. Their career has ended, and I think that's where that fear kicks in. I think a lot of times we find these great women and we're ready to settle down with these great women, but we think about that. Once I settle down, that's it for me, and I approach it from. I think there's two ways you can ultimately approach your retirement parties from a guy perspective. You can approach it as Michael Jordan, or you can approach it as Allen Iverson. Um, Allen Iverson, phenomenal athlete, phenomenal player, one of the greatest players of all time. But I mean, if you've picked up a newspaper or read any article, he has struggled significantly since he retired. And I think because he gave all to the game that he never put himself a plan to last in the world after his career was over. Um, and I think because of that, it struggles. And I think of people that go get into marriage and because they feel like they can't hang out with their friends or they can't do all these other things, they feel so restricted and almost claustrophobic that they run. And I think that's because that's all they ever knew was the game. And now that that game is over, they can't have fun, they can't enjoy themselves. And I think that's a poor way, a negative way of looking at things. And I think that's where I look at Michael Jordan and as great a player that he was, the greatest ever. He has had success as a business person. His Jordan company has expanded by leaps and bounds. He's had, you know, rather a few bumpy stops as the owner, but I think he's kind of found his niche now, where I think that's as much as he had a great career, it wasn't over for him, and I think he knew it wasn't over for him, and I think he approached his life as it wasn't over for. It was just the next chapter, and I think I think it's perfect timing. There was this um, Wale song. Wale, he's a rapper, and his song called Matrimony, and he on all his songs he has Jerry Seinfeld, kind of narrating or having a kind of a short skit on the song, and he talks about marriage and how it's new growth, how you're becoming a new person, and I think even though that this the female may be getting drafted and the female be starting her career, we don't have to approach it as it's the end of ours as men. I think we can approach it more so from the perspective of this is just the next phase of my life and this is new for me, and I'm going to approach it and try to be successful and such. And I think that sometimes gets over the fear, but I think a lot of it just is self inflicted. I think you know and I don't know about everybody's situation, but I have married friends that I still hang out with, um, as I would when we were single guys. I think the difference is it all is that I think sometimes that guys struggle with is their mentality when they're hanging out with their single friends or they're hanging out, and I think that's where it's important that you have people in your circle that can hold you accountable and still you can still have fun. I mean, I still have happy hours. I still go out and drink. I still hang out with a lot of my friends, and even though I'm not married yet, I don't anticipate a lot of that changing. But ultimately, because that's part of who I am, and that's part of, and I think that's what most guys struggle with is that we have to kind of shut off certain things of our life. And I think if you have to shut off certain things in your life, ultimately you shouldn't have been doing that in the first place. And so I think that's where we have to kind of learn that this is just a next phase. This is a new growth, and because we haven't experienced it before, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the road. It doesn't mean that it's just something new. It's just like going from one job to a new job. There's something you haven't experienced before, so you don't know what it's going to be. It could be the same exact role in your corporate America world, but it's a new company. It's a new feeling. It's a new vibe. So it can be a totally different experience. So I think that's where, looking back at how guys approach it and how girls approach it, I think that's 90% of the battle. I think a lot of times you put in ultimately what you get out of anything, whether it's work, love, relationships, friendships, and if you're gonna put in that work, if you're gonna retire and think that you can just coast the rest of your life, then yes, marriage, and you think that marriage is that retirement, you're gonna fail. But I think if you approach it as this is the next phase of my life, and you work equally as hard in this phase of your life as you did in the previous phase of your life, I think that's when you have the opportunity to be successful. And so, I think as I move forward, I definitely, things that I've come across and conversations that I've heard. And one of the things is that people think that marriage is, as much as we want it to be a honeymoon and different things, it is work. And I think that's one of the things that recurring themes that I've heard is that this is work, but it can be work that you enjoy. And it kind of goes to that quote that if you love what you're doing, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think if you approach marriage as that, you could be successful, but don't think it's the end of the road or it's the retirement phase. And I think, hopefully that can help some folks conquer that fear of, you know, I don't want to get married because I can't do this and I can't do that. But in the day, if you love somebody, a lot of the times that's worth it. And at the same token, if it's stuff that you can't do in front of your fiance or in front of your wife, ultimately you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. And I think that's where we have to get out of that fear and that idea that it's over for us because I don't see it as such. I'm excited to get married, and I think coming from me, a person that it's funny that I never thought I'd get here, but ultimately I'm happy I am. And I think a lot of it has to do with is, identifying that person and identifying that individual that helps you understand that this is the next part of your life, not the end of your life. And so, I approach it as such. And, I think this is a new growth